Team Panic. It is time to talk about how the dual spinner melty brain, currently called TBH because TBH, it has been a bit of a pain, and putting the word works in the title of this robot has given us negative results in the past. And it's definitely that, and definitely not things I've been doing. So we're going to talk about how this performed at ARC's October meet. And before we get going, there is just a quick word on the pits in the ARC arena. Unfortunately, they didn't have time to fix them again. The people who run ARC are volunteers, they don't get paid for this, and they've just been busy. That is what happens in life sometimes. However, knowing that I was fighting the melty brain today, I did ask that one of the pits remain up for the entire event, and they agreed with that, so we have one down and one up pit for the entire event, which is a good thing, realistically, considering I am fighting a melty brain which could potentially ping pong all over the place. Speaking of ping ponging all over the place, we should start having a look at some fights, starting with Killicorn. This is a four-wheel drive tanky robot with a metal horn sticking out the front.
Gonna take off.
So look, good and bad in this fight. Good, it does indeed work. The melty brain TBH spins up and does melty. However, a couple of things with the whole meltying side of things. A, it doesn't melty anywhere near as well as it did literally 2 days ago on the floor in my house. And I know that the two surfaces are as close as I can possibly get them. The arena and my testing surface are basically the same thing. I asked the ARC arena operators about what they use for the floor, and I copied that to the best of my ability, and yet we are still seeing wild fluctuations in the drive speed or the translation speed between home and here in the arena. So I have thoughts on this. I think I know what is going on with this, but we will talk more about that right at the end after we've discussed all of the fights, because that is going to be a slightly longer talk than I want to do right in the middle of talking about fights. So continuing to talk about this fight, unfortunately we didn't actually hit Killicorn in this fight because of course we were a little bit out of control. The melting, the translation, as mentioned, does kind of work, but does kind of not work all at the same time, which is a real pain and something I'm going to need to fix and work on moving forwards here. And also, of course, we lost a wheel. Now, this shouldn't have been that surprising, but I didn't actually check the wheels. If I had checked the wheels at all, I would have swapped them over because, yeah, these things were cracking and breaking through the middle. They are literally just like 4 mil of 3D printed PLA, and it's actually PLA Flex. So I have found very recently that the PLA Flex stuff is not as good as TPU, so I do need to go back to TPU for all of my wheel building and anything I want flexible. Flexible PLA seems to be okay, but it's just not the same level of good as flexible TPU is. So we need to fix that. But also, those wheels were old. They have basically been in every fight since they were made, and since I started running silicon on the dual spinner melty brain. And yeah, the amount of crazy force that this thing puts on its own wheels when it gets up to speed finally got to them and they broke. They shattered out the hub. Thankfully, I did have spares and I put those spares on because both hubs were bad. But those things are actionable. I can make brand new wheels out of TPU. I can make enough wheels that I'm swapping them out every 4 fights or so, and they should be totally fine. I could also put a mounting plate on the outside as well, something in a stiffer material that is just going to survive that force a little bit better. So that is things to think about for the future. But all of that is for another time because we need to start talking about the next fight up, which is against Iron Tooth, the biggest, baddest horizontal spinner in our Beetleweight league.
3, 2, 1, go!
And that is why I wanted the pits up. But, you know, these things happen. So, starting that fight off, we took a couple of shots from Iron Tooth, which hit the weapon systems, and hit the weapon systems on the pulleys, but thankfully the weapon systems both mostly survived. I mean, there was a break or a small break in one of the pulleys off of the weapon systems, but at the end of the day, things still span and things still ran, which was quite nice. I still haven't actually pulled this down and worked out how much damage there really was. One side, which is this side here, you might be able to hear that squeaking on camera, I don't know, but it gets a little bit tight in one section of the spin, which I think means that some of the ball bearings in here have busted a little bit. However, I put this in the test box after the fight and everything still spun up. The weapons spun up a little bit slower than I wanted them to, but I didn't have the time to actually fix it further than that. So the fact that they worked at all was kind of nice. Then the only other thing really left to talk about in that fight was the ricochet off the wall. Now there's a few things going on here. One, I was trying to avoid the wall. However, the melty wasn't going necessarily exactly where I told it to. If you watch the footage back, where the red arc is on the robot should be moving away from that. And a lot of the time it wasn't moving away from that in particular. It was either moving, like it was moving at an angle from that line. So I still have some work to do on my melting algorithms and things, and I do think that we might be getting back towards a time where I need to put an accelerometer and maybe even a beacon, an IR beacon on this thing. I think throwing more sensors at it for a little while is probably a good thing, get some things sorted and sussed out, and then maybe go back to not relying on that sensor data, because the more sensors you have in the thing, the more electronics you have to break during a fight or during repacking of the robot or something. So, you know, it's more weakness in the robot, I feel, which is partly why I've been doing it without sensors so far. Having said all of that, we did still hit the wall with Iron Tooth right there, and bouncing off the wall, we were still melting at quite high speed, as evidenced by this still, which is one singular frame where you can see the melty still spinning quite rapidly. And then when we managed to hit his wheel, and we go moving ridiculously quickly. So fast, in fact, that a single frame of the camera catches us as a giant blur mark across the arena, which is hilarious to me. That is so great. I kind of love that frame. And it's very, very unfortunate that we perfectly targeted the pit, because we actually did like straight line over towards the pit. There was nothing I could have done about that bounce. There was nothing I could have done to save the melty from going in the pit. We were just in the pit. However, that hit that we put on Iron Tooth broke his side of drive there. Somehow he runs flexible TPU wheels with foam outers on them. Those things should be an amazing shock mount for his entire drive system. And in fact, in the past, we have had issues getting through them with Annie because they are that resilient. And yet in this hit, we managed to obliterate that drive side and it just went down. So if we had stayed out of the pit, we probably actually would have won that fight. So, you know, these things happen, but hey, the pits were down and we fight in the arena that we have available to us. And so the outcome, of course, is that we lost that fight. But it's a better showing for the Melty, I think, in this particular instance. Because while we're still a little bit uncontrollable, we are very, very resilient, and it has proved that we can dish out the monster hits when we absolutely need to. And then the final fight of our round robin group is up against Lumberjack. Lumberjack is a scary vertical spinner. Now, going into this fight, before I talk about this fight, I will say that I had to take the battery out of TBH and charge it before this fight, and repacking everything in, I realized I had broken a couple of wires on my heading LED. So I thought I was going into this fight with 1 or 2 of the collars down for the heading LED.
3, 2, 1, go!
Yeah. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
But in fact, I went into that fight with the heading light completely broken. I think one of the the wires I broke on the light was in fact the common wire, which meant that none of the LEDs could light up inside the triple color LED. And we had nothing, which makes translating while in Melty mode very, very, very difficult. Because I can't see where I'm going, essentially. But even so, there was other issues there too. There was some weird glitch where one side of drive would just suddenly slow back down again and drop us out of Melty mode. That happened twice, and then we got into Melty mode and everything was fine. So I don't know what that was or why that happened. Now, might be another loose connection in there somewhere that I need to go through and fix, which is something else I probably need to update about this Melty. The wiring connections in here need to be as robust as possible, and I probably actually need to start eliminating as much wiring in this robot as I possibly can, because the more wiring that's in here, the more wiring that experiences G-force, and the more wiring I have to pack back in, all of which is not good for wiring, and we can break things fairly easily, as it turns out. On the plus side, the weapon system is amazingly resilient. Even after having taken those shots from Iron Tooth and being somewhat busted, we still managed to get the weapons up to speed and still managed to hit with those weapons at speed. As evidenced by the fact that we hit Lumberjack hard enough to pop the wheel off one side and basically get us the win there, which was incredible considering that we were melting effectively headless and we were running on broken weapons. Like, I'm proving to myself again that this concept would be exceptional. I just need to get it to work better than it is currently working. So at the end of that, we are at 2 losses and a win for our round robin group, which is unfortunately not enough to make it through into the finals. So that is where this event particularly ended for TBH. However, I am enthused by the effectiveness that we saw in this event. This is probably the best this robot and this system has worked ever, and I liked that. That worked out way better than I thought it was going to. And I can see what I think is a fairly clear way forwards now. Because what I think is going on, what I think is slowing us down, and what I think is the issue between here and ARC's arena is inertia. The big difference between those 2 clips of melting here at my house and melting in the ARC arena is the weapons. Every time I've spun up here in my house, I have not attached the weapons to the melty brain, which means that it's down nearly 500 grams, and all of that mass is at the absolute extremes of the robot. I also know for a fact that when I was melting here at home, every time the standoffs touched the ground, the melty heading changed. Amplify that resistance by a lot more, having a lot more weight over top of it, and all of a sudden, the melty mode is going to lose its heading significantly every time one of the skids touches the ground, which, as the melty is not fully balanced, happens more often than I would like. And it certainly happens every time I speed up to try and move in a direction. The other thing about all of that is that, as I mentioned, there is inertia behind this. The rotational inertia goes up considerably by slamming all of this weight out at the edges. And the amount of force that we are generating to push in a direction doesn't change. It is the same between the home test and the ARC arena. However, in the ARC arena, with the weapons on, not only are we losing the heading faster, but we also have that higher rotational inertia to overcome, which means that we move much, much slower across the arena. So how do we fix this? Well, there is a couple of different ways that I can see to fix this. Either I shrink the entire multi-brain in and make it taller to effectively reduce the amount of inertia that these extra weapons add to the whole system. Doing this is a bit of a problem though, because it opens us up to more damage essentially, because when we're fighting Iron Tooth, for example, Iron Tooth's weapon is hitting our pulleys already. By doing so, we would need to adjust the weapon system to basically give us more coverage so that we can go weapon to weapon with people more often than we go weapon to pulley with people, which would mean basically building a double malice where you've got drums on their side to take up the height of the new robot. But of course, we don't want to add any extra mass to the outside edges here, because adding more mass will add more inertia, which is the whole thing we're trying to avoid here. And it will mean, yeah, shorter profile drums and stuff, which means less bite, but you know, the bite should be good because we're spinning at a very, very high speed. I don't know, I don't particularly like that idea all that much, but I don't like the other idea I have either. The other idea will be to do what a couple of you have spoken about in the comments already, which is to go to a single weaponed melty. Now, the reason I haven't done this in the past is a lot of you are like, oh, just put one weapon on one side and increase the mass and it will be fine. But that is not how this system works. Any asymmetrical weapon, like the asymmetrical weapons that are on here, to make the whole thing asymmetrical, the counterweight has to be way heavier than the actual weapon tooth because it is so much closer in. To get the same amount of rotational inertia to balance everything out, the counterweight needs to be heavier, which means that if I just took this melty brain as it currently stands and removed one weapon, the counterweight that I would need to put on would be heavier than the weapon that currently exists, which means probably taking weight out of the other weapon to make the counterweight fit and balance and make everything work. However, in doing so, we would effectively reduce the inertia of the entire system. And if we didn't just take a weapon off here and in fact redesigned everything and stacked all of our electronics out into the counterweight and things, there is a chance that we could have the same size weapon or potentially slightly bigger. Not a huge increase by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe potentially just a little bit bigger. So that is an option, but it does mean completely redesigning the melty brain from the ground up. It does mean dropping off from a 2-weapon system to a 1-weapon system. And I don't know, I don't particularly like that just from an aesthetic point of view, I think. I mean, the end of the day here, part of the reason for building this is to try and get onto BattleBots. And as I've mentioned on here in the past, BattleBots likes unique silhouettes. This is a unique silhouette. This is a very unique, interesting looking design that people go, ooh, how does that work exactly? Building a single spinner melty brain, you could end up very easily building a tombstone. And that is not an interesting silhouette, or it is an interesting silhouette, but it wouldn't be a unique silhouette for BattleBots. So I would have to put a decent amount of work into the new design to make it something that BattleBots would even consider off the bat. These are things that I'm currently thinking about. If you have a thought or a opinion on which way I should go, sticking with the double and shrinking the robot in to reduce that inertia as much as possible, or going over to the single tooth, please let me know in the comments down below. I am happy to chat and discuss this as much as possible before making this decision. This is going to be a lot of work to the melty brain. Whatever we do, we are going to be basically scrapping this chassis and starting again from scratch pretty much. But yeah, so there we go. That is how the melty brain performed at ARC's October meet. Promising, but not great, is I think how I'm going to cap the end of this video. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.